Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a 5-game college basketball slate, and then we have an 8-game NBA slate for you. Before I get started, can you smash that like and subscribe button? We're going to do college basketball first, then we'll get NBA. So this 5-game slate features 3 blowouts and 2 tighter games, and then 3 of the games are higher scoring, and 2 of them are low scoring. So that is going to definitely play into how we look at this. We're going to go game to game here and kind of give you the rundown of each one, though. So we're going to start with the um, 2 core plays here that we have in Boogie Ellis and Julian Reese here. Those are my favorite plays on the slate. Keep in mind, it's going to be somewhat difficult to pay up for some guys because of the way the pricing is for the slate and that there's not a ton of value, but we'll get into that more as we go. So first, we're going to look at this Oklahoma Central Arkansas game. Now, this game features a 30-point spread with Oklahoma winning and 146.5 total for this game. I do expect Oklahoma to cover that. This is a pretty bad Central Arkansas team, and there really was not anything to like on Central Arkansas. Everybody's overpriced for this matchup. I don't expect them to have a very good game. However, they should be able to score some points, as Oklahoma does sport a pretty good offense and defense. Central Arkansas doesn't have either, so I expect Oklahoma to dominate this game. As for potential options on this in this game, Owea is actually my favorite option on the team, though he does carry some risk today with the blowout upside. He has played well in the blowouts and scored at least 27 fantasy points in most of them, so I think he is a viable option, but he definitely carries some risk. But it is a high scoring game, so that does give you some potential as well. But there's really not much to like from either team as they are overpriced outside of Owa, and so I think he's probably the only guy that I'm going to check too much of on this particular game. Though there are a couple value guys that you could throw darts at when it comes to Oklahoma, considering the blowout nature. So then we're going to look at Coppin State and Maryland. Now, Coppin State is favored to lose this game by 30 points as well. This game features the lowest total on the slate at 127 points, so that's definitely going to make it difficult. Coppin State is also one of the worst offensive teams on the slate. And then they also are pretty substandard defensively, though they do try to push the ball, which is a little bit surprising that this game is the lowest total on the slate, 127 points, especially with Maryland, who's not a real fast-paced team. But I think Coppin State will probably just shoot a lot of jump shots and not do very well. As for Maryland, they do tend to play rough defense this season, so they haven't been very good. But the combination of the rough defense on both ends and the awful offense from Coppin State keeps this game low. I expect Maryland to have a couple opportunities to have good players here. One of them being Reese, though. He's been very well and consistent this season for the most part. Now, his last game against UCLA was a fluke, but the foul trouble has limited him in a few games this season, so to keep that in mind. But I expect him to come out and have an absolutely monster game in this one. The big risk here, obviously, is that they blow them out, but he's definitely a capable option. Then you could also look at some of the value plays for Maryland, but honestly, there's not a whole lot here that we can rely on heavily, but due to the prices and stuff like that. But looking at Coppin State, there's absolutely nothing to like about this team. They have everybody's overpriced, and I mean their offense is atrocious, so I don't expect them to be useful on the slate at all. Looking at Texas Tech and Sam Houston, now this is the other blowout. This is a 17-point game in favor of Texas Tech. It also has a 141 total, and as you can see, Cambridge is out, which he is out for the season. If we look at Texas Tech, one way you could kind of go up against this slate is to, just to stack their mid-level guys, which is Toussaint, Washington, Isaacs, and Williams. Walton should get the start here in place of Cambridge. He started the last couple games now that Cambridge is out, but he's been mostly not very good, and his price is pretty high. Isaacs is the best play on this team, as he's got the most upside and consistency for any of the players on the team, and he's priced the fairest. The other guys are a little bit overpriced for their production, but they do have some utility on this slate, as they should be able to get plenty of minutes, and this team does tend to not go super deep in their lineup regardless of how things go. So I do look for them to have some utility, though they do carry some risk, but you could choose to stack them if you really wanted to. Looking at USC and Oregon, now this has the highest scoring spread on this at 149 points. total, excuse me, and it also has a 2.5 point spread in Oregon's favor. So that does give us some utility here. If we look at Oregon, they do have some guys out, which is Dante, Biddle, and Zarula. Now, Zarula and Biddle are both likely out for the season. Dante is out until mid-January, but none of, they've been out for several games, so I don't expect that to really have too much of an issue with this game. However, Oregon is somewhat overpriced on this slate, and they're going to be somewhat hard to figure out how to roster, as they do tend to be a little bit deeper with their bench. Though this game is going to be pretty tight, and I don't expect their cheaper guys to be have a lot of viability today due to that, relative tightness. They also have not played very well since Dante has been out, as he seemed to be a kind of a good force for them to have a good balance. And so, with that said, they're overpriced, and I really think that they're just hard to roster today. Um, you know, it's going to be it's an ugly game, especially considering the fact that it's the only really close game that has a high total. And so I think they're probably a little bit avoidable. As for UFC, this is where it gets interesting because UFC actually has some upside in this matchup. This is a tight game. I expect UFC to actually play decently well in this one. And I like Boogie Ellis the best. He has a lot of upside in this matchup. I think UFC is probably the best way you could choose to uh, attack this slate from a stacking perspective, at least with the guards with Collier and Kobe Johnson. The question is if you can find a way to actually fit them all in. With that said, the value plays on this team are definitely risky with Bronny James and Rodman and Vincent Iwuchukwu not playing particularly great. And having some tough matchup situations. But I think this game should be close and definitely has some utility to stack up some USC players. But again, it's going to be somewhat hard to do with the pricing, especially with almost no quality value on the slate at all. Looking at UCLA and Oregon State, this game features a 6 point spread for UCLA and 128 point total, which is very close to the lowest on the slate. Unfortunately, with this game, Oregon State really does not appear to have a great opportunity here. UCLA is a really good defensive team for the slate. In fact, they're the second best defense on the slate, and they're also the second best offense on the slate. And that gives them some utility, especially against a team that has been awful offensively and defensively. The problem with this game is both these teams play a very slow pace, and as for UCLA, they are overpriced as well. Bona and has a little bit of potential here, and you could even look at Mara as some potential, but they definitely carry a lot of risk on this slate. So it's kind of a really rough slate. I am playing light on this one. It's a pretty avoidable slate, to be honest, because of the pricing and the fact there's just not much value. And and since there's no injuries really to that really going to make a difference on the slate, it's hard to really feel like anything will open up as the day goes on. Let's move over to the NBA now. This slate is featuring 8 games, and we have an absolute metric ton of injuries. Most of these games are actually within 10 total points, but we do have a little bit more lopsided game with Boston being a 17-point favorite against Detroit, and Minnesota favored 10 points against Dallas, and then the Lakers favored at 12.5 points against Charlotte. Our high scoring game for the slate is Utah versus the Pelicans and Indiana versus Chicago, and the lowest scoring games are Memphis and Denver and the Charlotte Laker game. So keep those things in mind. Let's look at each team first, and then I will get into the top plays of the slate. Looking at the Pistons, Stewart is out. The Pistons have been absolutely terrible. They only have 2 wins on the season. They started the season 2-1. They've been losing for a while. They suck, and there isn't much to like about this team right now, fantasy-wise. They are not priced well either. Not only that, but this matchup is also annoying against the Celtics. Now, the Celtics could be missing some guys, and we'll talk about that here. Celtics are potentially missing Tatum and Brown. They're both questionable. But if Tatum and Brown were to miss, that would open up a ton of value for the slate, with Hauser and White and Holiday and Porzingis all getting potential boosts. We'll have to wait and see how that goes. If those guys play, then they will definitely have some potential, but they're an avoidable team for the most part from that perspective. Looking at the Jazz, they don't have anybody notable to really talk about, though they do feel a bit overpriced for the matchup here against the Pelicans, though it does have a high ceiling and it's a high ceiling game. The matchup isn't ideal for them, and they are expected to get beat pretty comfortably. Looking at the Pelicans, for Nance is questionable. They definitely carry some upside here, being the highest scoring game of the slate and projected to win by 8 points. That's what they are in the situation where I call it a contrarian stackable team. So you could definitely look at Zion and some of the other players on this team as a potential stack. Looking at the Pacers, they have a good matchup against Chicago. Now, the total is pretty high, and this is a pretty tight game. This should be a pretty good high-scoring game, though the Pacers are a little bit pricey, and they do have some risk because they've been shuffling the lineups a lot. The Bulls are also missing some players, which we'll talk about now with the Bulls. Vucevic and Levine are both out. Craig is also out. Well, lots of injuries here. Drummond should start again. His price has popped up a lot, but he's still viable here. And Clack, he's a core play for me. I have to explain that in a minute. DeRozan and White have some upside upside potential here, but they do have risk, as do several others on the team. So there's definitely some utility with the Bulls and Pacers game on this one. Looking at the Mavs, Kyrie and Kleber remain out. The Mavs have been a mess lately. I expect that will continue here. They're pretty avoidable in this matchup against Minnesota, which are favored to beat them pretty badly, and the total on this one's rather low. Looking at the Timberwolves here, Towns is questionable. If he were to miss, that would open up some value here. I don't expect that to translate much in fantasy, however, as they haven't done very well with him out this season, and even though the matchup is favorable for them, it's kind of an avoidable team right now. Looking at the Grizzlies, if Morant were to miss, that's the big question. Marcus Smart would get more of a boost, but it's hard to feel good in this matchup against the Nuggets, who are playing pretty well throughout the season. Looking at the Nuggets, Gordon is out. This should open up a little bit of value, but it doesn't open up a ton because they're just gonna they typically rely on Murray and Joker, and then somewhat of Porter Jr. and Gordon. So I think the three guys in Murray, Joker, and Porter will get most of the usage in this one, and I expect them to play well in it as well and win this game handily. Looking at the Miami Heat, they have a ton of questionable and doubtful tags here. So Richardson and Martin are doubtful. Butler, Lowry, and Robinson are all questionable. This game could be a very annoying game for fantasy, and I tend not to like using anyone on this team this year as they slow the game down a lot and a bit overpriced right now, not to mention the questionable tags. But they definitely have some utility on this slate because they are playing in a faster paced game than they normally do. We'll talk about the Warriors now, who they're facing. One of my fantasy rules is to not use players against Miami and DFS, especially in bigger slates, and everyone here is overpriced as well. They're a very avoidable team on this slate, and the total is not very high considering the fact that Golden State is playing in it. For the Spurs, Bassie is out. Now, the Blazers are missing a lot. Wemby could cook here. So could Keldon Johnson. It's hard to like much beyond those guys, but they do have some potential here, and there's definitely some value that you could leak out. Looking at the Blazers, they have Ayton, Sharp, and Williams all out. Simmons will get a lot of runs, so will Brogdon and Grant. San Antonio Spurs are not playing much defense these days either, so they're definitely a stackable team. They do carry a little bit of risk as the game does have a pretty good total and a pretty tight game, but I expect it to be a little bit difficult to figure out on the slate. Though I do like Dua Reef a lot as a starting center for the Blazers. Looking at the Hornets, Ball is out, Williams is doubtful, Hayward is out, and Miller is questionable. The Patchwork Hornets are going to need a big game from Rozier and Bridges to keep this one close. But the Lakers don't play as much defense as they used to. However, this game is low scoring at just 227 points. It is a 12.5 point favor for the Lakers, too. I do think that Rozier is in play on this slate due to his price, but he's still a little bit risky in this matchup. We'll have to wait and see what the Lakers lineup also looks like and whether LeBron and Davis play. Speaking of that, they are both questionable. Reddish is also questionable, and Vincent is out. The daily, will LeBron play, and if he does, will he put in the effort to win the game late in the fourth quarter? Lottery continues. I tend to avoid both LeBron and Davis in fantasy due to Davis's injury risk, and LeBron being the biggest fourth quarter player of the season, but the game lasts 4 quarters, and if the Lakers are smoked or ahead comfortably, they won't put in the effort. Bonus points that Vegas has this game at a low price, at a low total, which makes it pretty avoidable from the Lakers' perspective. Let's go and get into our top plays of the slate now. So first of all, we're going to talk about Reith for the Portland. Now, he's only started a handful of games this season, but he's played very well in those games, scoring over 20 fantasy points in all of them. I expect him to have a lot of upside in this matchup as a result. His price is dirt cheap, and he's a great play on the slate, and he's going to be very popular at this price. Next, we're going to look at Andre Drummond for Chicago Bulls. Now, he's going to start again with Vucevic out. In the last game against the Hawks, he played 38 minutes and had an absolutely monster double-double with 24 points and 25 rebounds. The Pacers' defense in the paint is a little bit better, but I expect him to cook and do well in this one anyway. His price has popped up a whole lot. And I'm just going to point this out. He has not scored 37.5 fantasy points in any game other than one all season long. He had 37 against the Spurs a couple games ago, but beyond that, he's been under 37.5 all season. Not a single game besides the last one against the Hawks. So that is somewhat of a concern, but he's going to get plenty of minutes in this one, assuming he doesn't get into foul trouble. Again, that is a potential possibility in this game as well, but I do think he's a viable option, so he's definitely worth a look, and I think he is a core play because of that upside. Looking at Michael Porter Jr., he does tend to be a streaky player, but with Gordon out, he will likely get more usage here. Uh, Surprisingly, his price has actually come down some recently, but that is because he does have a low floor, and his minutes tend to be a little bit all over the place. However, with Gordon out, he's going to get more usage as a result, and that gives him some utility here. Then we'll look at Joker for them. I mean, he is the MVP of the season right now, I think, and he's going to have a lot of potential. He didn't have a great game against Memphis the first time they played, but he's been a monster just about every game this year. I expect that to continue here, and I think he'll have a big game as a result of this matchup and hopefully get a triple-double and pay off. However, he's not nearly he's not even somebody that you have to look at too much because you have so many good options at center today, especially value. Looking at DeMar DeRozan, now he's the type of guy that's very consistent. Now the matchup here is good and he's been pretty consistent, but I don't expect a 5.5x plus game. I think somewhere between a 4.8 and a 5.3x game is about what you will get with him today. Obviously that does carry a little bit of risk, but he's pretty safe play on the slate, and with the injuries to the Bulls and the plus match against the Pacers, he has some utility. Then we're going to look at Jamal Murray. He should get plenty of usage today. He's been a little bit streaky this season, as he typically is, but he's playing very well the last few games, and he has a lot of upside. And Gordon's out, so his usage should go up a little bit more. In fact, he's been shooting the ball very well the last few games, so I like his upside in this one, and he should get some threes, and he's got some good peripheral numbers as well. So he's definitely a good play on the slate. Looking at Simmons for for Portland, excuse me, he's going to have a lot of potential in this game. With all the injuries to the team, his usage is going to be high. It's been high. He's got a higher ceiling, and he's about the same price as DeRozan. So that does give him some utility here, though his floor is a little bit lower than DeRozan's as well. I do think it's a good option, a good game to target with the Trailblazers here against the Spurs, and so he's definitely a viable option. And if you have that utility spot open, you need 82 to $8,300. Anywhere between DeRozan or Simmons will be a viable possibility. Looking at Zion Williamson for the Pelicans, he's also played pretty well lately, though he's been a lot lower floor than I'd like for his price. However, he does have a high ceiling, and when he's motivated, he does play well. This matchup does give him some utility, and so he's definitely worth a look. But he does have that injury concern, and that is a problem here. Looking at Terry Rozier for Charlotte, he definitely carries some potential in this one as he's played very well with all the injuries to the Hornets. He has all the usage he can handle. He's going to shoot a ton of shots. I do think that he has some utility in this game against the Lakers, especially in the first three quarters, because I don't think LeBron will guard him too much, at least not until the fourth. And so that will give him some utility. If he can score a bunch of points, then that would definitely help him pay off, which he's definitely capable of doing. He's only had a couple off games, and the problem here is if they were to get blown out, which is definitely possible. But Vegas really has this as one of the lowest scoring games on the slate, so it's definitely not a game to target too much of, but he is definitely a viable option. So with that said, guys, thank you for liking, commenting, subscribing. I hope everybody does well today, and have a nice day, guys.